So, The Martian is alright. But seriously, it was really, really cool. I decided that I'm going to talk about them in the order that I experienced them. I went and I saw the movie first last Sunday, and I have to say that the movie was incredible, from my perspective at least, having experienced it before the book. I haven't been this excited for a movie since the last Marvel movie, which granted wasn't that long ago, but Marvel movies are probably the only movies that I get really excited to go see. I'm a huge Marvel comic fan. And so for years I've gone out and seen the movies on opening weekend and really enjoyed myself. And when I saw The Martian, I liked it even more than the few most recent Marvel movies. Full disclosure, my theater experience was awesome. We went to a theater that we normally don't go to here in town, and they had put in recliner seats for all of the theater chairs. And it was mostly empty, and nobody talked to anybody or made any sound, so I didn't have to listen to somebody going or having their throw sand in his eyes moment. So that probably helped in comparison to Biff and Noss's movie-going experience, which was not the best. Things that I thought about the movie specifically: Matt Damon, he's the man. I think that the movie, unless they had really just picked some garbage actors, would have still been good, but Matt Damon played that part so perfectly, I can't imagine anyone else being in that role. He nailed it. He nailed, as I discovered later, the Watney from the book in terms of his personality and how he reacted to things. That perfect mix of smart, sarcastic, and funny. And he made it feel very believable. He didn't have any crazy macho moments or anything like that. It was just a man beating the Martian elements using nothing but his wits. To be honest, all of the acting was really good in the movie. They just had a good, solid cast that put everything together, I think, as perfectly as it could have been. I really liked the visual design and special effects. They felt very real, which is hard to really quantify, I think, but compare it to Interstellar, which is the same sort of vague, futuristic, sci-fi, but still grounded a lot in reality sort of movie. And a lot of that didn't feel real, if that makes sense. But this did, and I really appreciated the effort that they put into making Mars look like Mars, and making the ships look like near futuristic vehicles that I've actually seen concepts of. I felt like that they didn't ham-fist the science stuff in the movie, and they did a really good job of explaining things so that if you were sitting in the audience and you had no idea what Delta V was or what a gravity assist was, they explained it to you in a way that made sense but didn't feel like they were dumbing it down too much. And that's another really hard line to walk properly, because they kind of did that in Interstellar. Again, I'm comparing it to Interstellar, but they kind of stopped every time they needed to explain something to make sure that the audience knew what it was. And they explained it in the most simple, almost elementary school version that I could think of. But this didn't do that. It made it a part of the dialogue. It made it all, or it integrated it all very well into what was going on in the story naturally and with the pace of things. So it didn't wind up being a Reddit explain it like I'm 5 post about space exploration. And the Iron Man thing was dumb. I have to say that, but it was okay. It was the only part in my opinion where the movie kind of fell apart for a moment. So I can live with it. The book, in comparison, was amazing. The movie was excellent. The book is amazing. I'm so glad that I saw the movie first, because this is one of those situations where if I'd read the book and then went to go see the movie, I think I would have been disappointed. It would have been entertaining, but they took a lot out, and I get it. They had to have a movie that was only, a couple of hours long, and it made sense pacing-wise. They changed only a few minor things here or there to make it make sense on the screen. And so I'm okay with those things, but there was just so much more in the book. He solves probably 10 times more problems in the book than he does in the movie, and that's kind of the whole point of the book. It's a love letter to space exploration and the human scientific mind and the human scientific endeavor. So the book being a lot longer, including a lot more of that stuff, made sense, and it was great. Unlike Biff and several other people that I've heard say that the second act in the book is very slow and boring, it slows down for sure. I'm not going to argue that point. But I'm the kind of personality that loves that sort of thing. I love problem solving and tinkering, and so I quite enjoyed the second act where he's preparing for his trip and dealing with fixing all these little problems and getting stuff to work. That probably was my favorite part in the whole book, to be honest. And I have to say, in response to Nos a couple of weeks ago, I like the pirate ninja thing. I didn't mention this in the psych write-up that you guys are going to get to, but that's another thing that really helped him deal with his situation. Just the little ways that he could take control of it. And you may be thinking, well, that sounds silly. He's very clearly taking control of his situation by fixing all of these things and making Mars his own and all of that sort of thing. But really, he's just someone who's living there, dealing with all of these things. He's like the Mars janitor, having to clean up after everyone that was there and clean up after himself. And he's the Mars maintenance crew, having to fix the rovers and fix the hab and fix his suit and fix all these problems. That's not him owning it, but him renaming a unit of measure that he doesn't like into the pirate ninja is him owning it. And psychologically, that gives him a huge boost, or at least some boost. And then you combine that with everything else that happens and that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on when they get to it. And you have a recipe for success and for survival. The only thing that I missed overall, I missed in the movie, I missed the rover rolling over part. I don't know if at that point they were just, it didn't make sense since he didn't ever lose communication with NASA, or if it didn't make sense pacing wise or whatever. But I missed that in the movie. It was one of the, I feel like, the better problems he had to solve in the book. And then in the book, I wish we would have spent some time with the Hermes crew as they're headed home, just discussing what happens on the ship and how they make it back, and not necessarily going for the kind of happy ending thing that was in the movie, but just a little bit more explanation, because the book just kind of ends. And it's allowed to do that. It's a book. You know, that is one way to end a story, for sure, and I've seen it done before, but you always want a little bit more of something that you enjoy, and so a little bit more would have been good for me. Well, I think that wraps up my feelings, my personal feelings on the movies or the movie and the book. Coming up a little bit later when they actually get to it, I'm going to give you guys a psychological analysis of the movie and book, kind of a broad overview of the psychology of it, and mostly what they got wrong, because for all of the science stuff that they got right, they got all the psychology stuff wrong. And then after that, there's a specific psych profiling of Mark Watney. It's more of a general overview than it is a very specific case study. It's very hard to put together a case study from this sort of perspective. I can give you very general, overarching psychological traits, but without an actual interview, it's next to impossible to come up with a lot of the specifics, and I didn't want to generalize and speculate too much. I don't want to do the character that is Mark Watney an injustice by painting him for you guys as something that he's not. So I stuck only to the things that I knew for sure, or was like 95% certain that is what it would be like. So you're not going to get any diagnoses, you're not going to get he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, although there's a little bit of that in there. But I don't specifically come out and say he was this and he had that. It's very much a broad overview of his psyche. So I hope you guys enjoy that when it comes up a little bit later on in the show. The Martian, an overall psychological analysis. The Martian as a creative work, in my opinion, is one of the best things to come out of the last decade in entertainment. As a production, it's mostly well-paced, being thoughtful and informative while at the same time being exciting and gripping. Few works are able to be both realistic and exciting, as one tends to overshadow the other. However, The Martian beats these hurdles in most respects. The book in particular suffers from a slow second act, and the movie had its Iron Man moment. Still, I'll be shocked if the movie doesn't receive several nominations at the various award ceremonies in the coming months. The one part where it waffles the most, though, and indeed this is the case for most works of fiction, is how grounded it is in real-world psychology. It isn't entirely awful, but a few problems exist. First of all, where are NASA's psychologists? In the movie, they're nowhere to be seen at all, and in the book, they get about 3 pages worth of Psych 101 stuff that, while true, isn't really a good descriptor of why and how Mark survived. In the real world, NASA would have gotten a team of the best psychologists on the planet to figure out how to combat his loneliness and helpless feelings. This would have been more important than anything else, because if he gives up just one time, it's over. Second, the psychological ramifications of loneliness are ignored. Watney spends roughly 2 years on Mars alone with TV reruns and bad music. His only communication is text chat, and while that would go some way towards abating loneliness, it isn't enough. People need human interaction. Even the most introverted person needs it to survive. Human sociability is what allowed us to evolve to be what we are today. He is shown to get a bit loopy towards the end, but in all reality, even the most resilient person would eventually slip into deep depression from the lack of human contact. On top of that, loneliness has the medical ramifications of reducing the effectiveness of your immune system, causing you to feel overly or unnecessarily tired, and extreme cases of loneliness cause psychosis in the forms of auditory hallucination. A person who is alone for too long will literally start to hear voices around them, much like someone who suffers from schizophrenia. Those are just the big ones, but for the sake of time we'll move on. Third, the Hermes crew reactions are all wrong. The Hermes crew does react with guilt and anguish to be sure, but psychologically and statistically speaking, at least one of them should be angry about leaving him behind, while one of them should be defending the decision to do so. Yet they all essentially mourn what happened and band together to fix it. While not an impossible reaction, people rarely react this way in crisis situations. More often than not, 1 or 2 individuals work against the greater good in order to preserve the self. That's millions of years of evolutionary instinct at work, and even in astronauts going to Mars, it would still be present. Furthermore, the Hermes crew should be suffering from guilt response. Guilt typically impairs judgment, shortens tempers, and can cause severe psychological trauma depending on the situation. Leaving a close friend to die on Mars would rank up there pretty close to the top, as essentially they would feel the collective guilt of leaving a friend to starve to death cold and alone. Fourth and finally, even after returning, Watney would be a psychological wreck and need years of therapy to recover. While the book doesn't get into this at all, the movie makes it seem like that he comes home and goes back to work immediately. That isn't the case, at least not in the real world. While Watney's personality does seem likely to recover, he would most likely be suffering from depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, potentially an anxiety disorder, and the leftover effects of hallucinations, which could persist for quite some time. Not to mention the completely unknown effects that months in a highly radioactive, low-gravity environment would have on his brain. For the movie, they needed a happy ending, and for the book, it may have just been too hard to tackle the unknowns of it. But still, this is an area that deserves a mention of some kind in my book. Differences are present in the book and movie version of The Martian. However, they convey the same psychological profile overall. They just do it in a different way. In the book, we see most everything in the past tense as a journal entry, while in the movie we have to see it in the moment. Both, however, reflect the same high spirit, his ways of coping with humor and sarcasm, and his willingness to continue on no matter what. We're going to go over my interpretation of Mark Watney's psychological profiles, both pre- and post-Mars. These are based on my real-world experience in creating patient profiles. I did attempt to find NASA's methods and official forms for use, but was unable to do so in the time allowed. Please note that these profiles are going to be truncated for time and for the fact that I wanted to avoid as much speculation as possible. If I was not sure, I did not put it. So let's begin. Subject: Astronaut Mark Watney. Pre-Ares mission evaluation. Watney is a man fit for the job. Not only does he possess a strong mind and body, but he also possesses a sharp wit. Watney is what we would refer to as a class clown. His inner-city upbringings and parental influence have left him with a knack for humor and comedic timing. Rather than respond with anger or lash out with an insult, he's quick to quip about the size of one's mother. While offensive to some, the type of person that has the moxie to survive a trip to Mars will typically find this sort of insult funny. As such, Mark is a sure fit for the mission crew. This type of personality will be good for deflecting a hostile situation and disarming arguments. His mouth may get him in trouble too, though. The jokes persist in the happy times as well, and such quips are not always welcome during a serious crisis or a moment where focus is required. While Watney himself would be well suited to dealing with another human like him, the rest of the Hermes crew may find him annoying. The mission commander should be sure to keep him in check at all times. His humor has other benefits as well. He generally has a higher morale in pressure situations, and it allows him an avenue to blow off steam even when it doesn't seem reasonable to be able to do so. In fact, I might go so far as to say that he has a childlike attitude when it comes to dealing with crisis and stress situations. He tends to give the negative aspects in his life personality traits, much like we do with a child when we ask them if the pavement hurt them after they fell down. His sarcasm behaves in much the same way. It's a defense mechanism that essentially allows him to blow off extreme adversity and negativity. Few can boast such a strong ability to make a snarky remark and then continue working on the piece of equipment that just hurt them. Mark can, though, and that ability will serve him well in the harsh Martian environment. All in all, Mark Watney's personality is strong and stable. Not many are better suited to a deep space mission in close quarters. He will be a valuable asset to the team, not only for his botanical and mechanical skill set, but also for his uplifting yet somewhat abrasive personality. Post-Ares evaluation. Mark has demonstrated some very extreme personality strengths over the last couple of years. To be honest, I don't know how he's still standing at this point. After over a year of near total isolation, I'm not sure how well he will integrate back with society, but for now he's stable. As we thought, his sarcasm and humor served him well. He wrote in a journal fairly frequently during his time on Mars, and through that we've pieced together a testimony for evaluation. Upon initial inspection, it seems he created another person to tell his story to. That person in his log was most likely his parents or a close friend. It's hard to know for sure, but he has quite a lot of passion in his words and shorthand speech. It's almost like he was a child and his journal was an imaginary friend. This is probably the number one reason he pulled through. He created himself a friend to share the experience with. On top of that, he did manage to regain contact with NASA for some time. Text-based communication has many drawbacks compared to real face-to-face or even audio interaction. It was enough of a drip feed, though, to boost his spirit and keep him going. You can see a shift in his journal as well. During the time when he has contact with NASA, he seems more upbeat and a bit like a kid whining to his friend that his parents make him do the chores. When he's isolated, he treats the journal more like a confidant, with intimate details and much more true feelings. These two things alone contributed more to saving him than any other. Despite hating disco music and 70s TV shows, they provided a much-needed distraction from how dire his situation was on Mars. Music and TV have been tested for decades to determine what effect they have on people, and 9 times out of 10, any music or TV is welcome to no music or TV. That effect only grows as people become more disconnected, as we are able to form simple bonds with these types of medium. They are in our lives, so we form an attachment to them. Mark is an extreme case of this, to be sure. We probably could have had him watch anything, though, and we would have gotten the desired result. Mark's inner stubbornness is the final deciding factor for him surviving. He decided he wanted to live, and he was going to be damned if anything killed him. That trait is honestly not a rare one, but when coupled with his excellent coping skills and the fact that he actually kept a journal, we have a recipe for success here. Good mental health brought him home just as much, if not more, than the rockets that made the journey. In all, Mark is going to need a lot of help. Given the seriousness of his circumstances, we would be amiss to even attempt to put him back to work in the next few months, perhaps years. All of that will come after a full detailed interview where we can actually assess how bad his depression and anxiety issues are. Only time will tell how much we can actually help him recover. Odds are that he will always suffer Martian nightmares, but he can probably survive those too.